child support. It's an outgrowth of some work I did with Bob Willis many years ago, where we asked about child support. What? It's an outgrowth of work that I've done many years ago with Bob Willis about child support. And the new features here, as you'll see, have to do A, with the introduction of remarriage, and B, with general equilibrium considerations. First thing I want to show is that remarriage, in some sense, is important in the data. So where's my page down here? Okay, so this is aggregate statistics about what happens in marriage markets, and generally what happens in marriage markets over time is A, less marriage, but B, which is more important for us here, is more turnover. So it's not simply that people divorce more, which they do, but they are very likely to remarry after the divorce. And as you can see already in this graph, the remarriage rate is generally high compared to the first marriage rate, and it's of course high compared to the divorce rate. So basically, people want to be married. Okay, marriage is a natural state, but when bad things happen, they choose another partner. And over time, there were fairly large changes in aggregate divorce and remarriage. The scale here is not so clear, but if you look at the divorce statistics in particular, they went up very quickly within a decade, actually doubled in a decade after being more or less flat, and afterwards they are again flat. It's an indication of some so-called divorce revolution. There was a structural change around this period, and it's a puzzle in the literature exactly what was the trigger, but it's not the basic point I want to talk about. I want very quickly just to go through the data, not the cohort kind of data, and I have cohorts both from the HRS, which are essentially cohorts which entered the marriage market a long time ago, and from the NLS, which entered relatively.
It's hard to read the. Where's this data from? What country?
All the data is from the US,
Okay.
and I'm using two types of samples. One is the NLSY, and one is the HRS. HRS is the one Bob just talked about, and I looked at the marriage history of these people, in particular cohorts, and the same thing for the NLS, which I didn't show yet. So it's a cohort in the US at different points in time.
What are the years?
On the is it clear? What's going on here? Okay, this is the same thing as the entry into marriage rate in the NLS. One thing which you can see here is that men and women became more alike. I don't want to dwell on this particular one except to compare it to remarriage rates. It doesn't show well on the.
Press Control L.
Control L. It doesn't center for me. Control L. Okay, thank you. That will save time.
Go back. Escape. Yoram, do escape.
Okay?
No.
To enlarge it. How do I enlarge it?
There's a plus above the slide. Now it's 53.
Help.
איפה העכבר? One more. בסדר?
בסדר, אוקיי? Does it help? Okay.
בסדר?
All right. So these guys are now the remarriage rates. And you can see that the remarriage rates that they are, again, relatively high, especially in the younger cohorts, namely in the more recent cohorts, namely the ones from the NLS. Those are the cohorts which entered relatively late. So compared also with divorce, we generally can see that the same periods in which a lot of divorce, there was a lot of remarriage, or also the same cohorts which had a lot of divorce also had a lot of remarriage. So generally, remarriage and divorce happen together and should be dealt in conjunction. And that's especially relevant when we talk about the issues of children, because most of this correspondence happens in the early part of the life cycle. Later on, these two processes start to depart from each other. Okay, one last, this is just for information. A lot of people marry more than once. And if you look at the data from 1996, this is marriage histories. Then you can see that take people who are 40 to 49, where these things sort of peaks. About 20% of the people marry twice, and 5% of the people marry 3 or more. Toward the end, this is something also to remember. Men find it more easy to remarry, so they accumulate more marriages than women. Okay, so this is just a motivation, and what I would like to do here is to examine the impact of divorce and remarriage on children. One consequence of the higher turnover is that the more children who live in non-standard families, namely they don't live with their original parents, they could live either with a single parent, or they can live with step-parents, or even some other arrangements. About 30% of the children now live in such alternative arrangements. And there's a lot of interest in what happens to them. There's a lot of worry about that, and a lot of intervention or planned intervention in this process. People have studied extensively the issue of what's the impact of divorce on children, or separation on children, and generally it's in the direction that in fact children suffer from divorce or separation of their parents. So the general message is the best thing for the children is to stay with their original parents, although it's not clear exactly whether this effects happen before the divorce or even or after, and how long they last. So there's some work on this, but I'm not going to summarize it, just saying that it has been made. Now, what we would like now to enter here into is the question of transfers in particular the incentive of fathers to transfer money to their custodial mothers. And this again dates back to my work with Bob, because the apparent view is that fathers don't give enough to their children, even when they live apart, or even when they are living close by, or even when the fathers are rich. There's a lot of people who just don't have an agreement, and some of those who have agreement don't pay. So there's a general problem, or appears to be a general problem, of underpayment. And that's one reason why many women who divorced and are the custodian actually fall into poverty under the general definition. So because of this interest in poverty and this major welfare effects, one wants to go back and study the issue of transfers and understand why the transfers are in some sense small. So that's one objective, but the way, as I said, we want to put it into a general equilibrium context. So we explain a couple of feedbacks here. And the nature of the feedbacks is, among other things, is there will be some relationship between my willingness to divorce and the aggregate divorce rate in the society. There will be some relationship between my willingness to give to my wife and what other people do. So this type of interactions will play an important role. And when you think about them, one outcome that will come out of that is that having high divorce rates can be quite good in many ways, not only because it's a way of cleaning or clearing failed marriages, but also when many people divorce, it has externalities, and some of these externalities can end up in a way which will be beneficial to children. However, to get this kind of mechanism, you generally will need a large change in the divorce. So the mechanism that you can think about it, that I'm going to describe, is one of many, but one simple-minded mechanism will be simply when in society more people are used to having divorced couples. There are some institutions that arise which makes this transition easier. But you'll see exactly how we go about it. I don't think I can do much here. That's okay? So what are the main features of this model? And Pierre-André and I had similar models and this is just one example of them. One thing that in terms of the gains from marriage, remember I told you that marriage is sort of the natural state. So what are the gains from being married? One has to do with shared consumption. Another has to do with companionship. And the third has to do with children. And in terms of companionship or quality of match, we are going to think about it in a way as a variable which can change over time. And this will eventually trigger divorce. In terms of the economic consideration, we'll think about them as something which stays. So it's always good to marry for economic reasons, but some marriages can turn out bad, and then you want to move on and find another mate. However, to find another mate is difficult, so there are frictions. So this is a search model. You can stay single. If you remain single, you lose the value of companionship. You lose also the ability of sharing consumption. And a very important feature here is this risk of remaining single does depend on the decisions of others to divorce. The search technology is the one which has increasing returns, which means the more singles are around, it's easier for each of us to find a person who wants to marry or remarry. So this will play a feature because it has a positive feedback in the direction that when I divorce, I make it easier for others to divorce at the end, and this is a positive interaction. The search element also involves rents and bargaining over rents. In this particular paper, in contrast to a previous one, we deal strictly with the issue of asymmetry. Men and women are not symmetric here, especially not at the stage of divorce. And this is reflected here by the fact that men have more income than women when they divorce. And this can, in fact, be an outcome of having children. So in some sense, it can be made endogenous in the model. And to bridge this asymmetry, there will be transfers. Now, transfers can happen in many points in times and in many fashions. In this particular model, the transfers which we're going to focus on will be transfers made at the time of divorce. They are binding contracts, but people may voluntarily bind themselves, and in particular, fathers are going to bind themselves at the time of divorce. The reason for that is they want to influence what happens to the child, they continue to care about the child. And the type of binding that we are thinking about here is one in which the father says that he will give money to the mother if she remains single, and only if she remains single. These particular contracts are not the only child support contract. This can be thought about as alimony. They are on top of some contracts which are forced by law, and this is just money added on for a particular purpose. The purpose here on which we focus in this particular paper is on an attempt to influence the bargaining power of the mother when she enters a remarriage. When we talked all the time before, we talked about divorce contracts. The main feature was that, or the main consideration was what happens if the mother remains single. What I would like to emphasize here is what happens if the mother remarries. When the mother remarries, there is a new agent coming into the story, the new husband. Now this new husband may care or may not care about the welfare of the child. I mean, he has his own child who is now under the control of his ex-wife. Why should he care for this new child that is not his natural child? So one can take different views about it. Simplest view would be, of course, that a child is a child, and so who is the father doesn't matter. So it will be, when a remarriage occurs, it's a complete replacement. But this is not the view that we take. We take that idea, that sort of selfish gene idea, that people care more about their own children. So in the extreme case, when there is a remarriage, there's a conflict. The new husband does not care about the child. The mother does. So the question is how they would bargain about what the child gets. However, whatever they bargain about also have implications for the father. If the bargaining outcome would be a low expenditure on the child, the father suffers from that, but he can influence the outcome by making this commitment, which influence the bargaining position of the mother through the threat point. Okay, so this is the general feature of this model. And the main result is that when you have this kind of game, if you wish, the Nash bargained outcome, namely what happened within remarriage, may be convex, or could be under fairly general condition, be convex in the threat points, which leads to some type of equilibria that will happen at the boundary. In other words, what will happen because of these convexities, that when a father decides on how much to commit, he will tend to commit either to a very high payment or to a very low payment, but not something in between. Now, if the equilibria are with high commitment, of course, this is better for the child, but this will usually be also associated with higher divorce and remarriage rate. So, what will happen is the following: that if there is higher divorce and higher remarriage, so in other words, there's a lot of turnover. The question, how does it affect the children, of course, depends on the transfers. Now, in the case of no transfers, the children suffer from that, and the mechanism by which they suffer is this intervention of a new agent, namely the new husband. If there are transfers, the children can be protected, and in fact, it's possible to protect them completely by making such commitments. So in other words, the father can actually make such a commitment which will make the welfare of the child constant. However, to make such a commitment, the divorce rate has to be, and the remarriage rate have to be relatively high. Let me explain the intuition of what happens here. What's the nature of the commitment? You give a commitment to your wife that she will get money if she remains single. If she's in fact likely to remain single with very high probability, you end up paying. And you end up getting the benefit, which happen only upon remarriage, with very low probability. On the other hand, if there's high remarriage probability, the probability that you'll pay is actually small. The probability that you will benefit is actually high. So you have more incentives to give. So high divorce associated with high remarriage is associated with higher incentives to give. So in a way, if you think about it, divorce rates can serve as sort of coordination mechanism in such markets. They can induce contracting, and if they're big enough, they can actually make children better off. This is sort of, in a nutshell, what this paper is about. And let's see if I can now give you a few details. I don't have a watch on my, well, how much time do I have?
20 minutes.
Okay, so let me go now through the elements of the model. There's an adult good and a child good. Adult good is a public good. Child good is consumed only by the child. There's a quality of match, theta. Theta is companionship or love. Love can turn into hate. So this is in the Bible, by the way, Amnon and Tamar. And it's therefore in this model is viewed as a random variable. It's ex ante random. The way we model it simply, when you marry, you have some expectations about the quality of the match. It takes time until you discover what it is. After you discover, you can get actually a bad surprise. And those are the bad surprises which eventually will trigger divorce. Preferences here are assumed to be quasi-linear, so to reduce the role of income effects. And there's a lot of sort of combinations that one can think about it, about households. And we need to separate between parents and step-parents. And let me sort of very briefly say what's done here. So on the adult good, it's shared by the partners, whoever they are. Okay, so if two men and women marry, they establish a household, they can share the adult good. It doesn't matter if they are the parents of the child. Concerning the child is a public good to his parents, but there is a sort of a locational element as well. If a certain parent lives apart from the child, he may, in some respect, get less benefit because of less contacts. So delta is a kind of discount factor, taking this idea that far from sight is far from heart. So it's taking this into account. And the theta I is this, the love factor is also shared by any particular married couple, whether they are the father and mother or a new household. However, a single person does not have, unfortunately, this theta, and this is one of the losses. And we have a relatively simple matching story. There are equal numbers of males and females. After separation, they can remarry, but we restrict the remarriage to be within cohorts, so it's sort of basically for simplification. It's not completely descriptive, so we don't allow in the second period to compete for the young women. You only compete for people of your age, which means you can only remarry with a divorcee. And of course, in order to marry someone, he has to want to marry you as well. Now, as I said, a very important feature is the increasing returns. A remarriage is easier the larger is the number of singles around. So we denote by M the actually matches that will form, and they are soon to be increasing function of the divorce rate within the cohort.
Yoram,
Yep.
why do you only marry a divorcee? What about people who didn't get married and just...
That's what I'm saying. That's an assumption here.
No, but in terms of the matches...
You marry people of your own age.
No, that I understand.
And in the first period, the young married the young.
Yes, but...
Second period, some separated.
But does everybody get married?
What?
I thought some people... were...
In the first period, everyone marries.
Everybody marries. Single is worse than any form of marriage.
Yeah. So it's not leftovers, because this model has a lot of gains for marriage, and everyone is identical.
That's what
Notice, by the way, that there's a distinction here. This relates to this question. In the second period, it's not obvious that everyone will marry. So the remarriage probability is P, the meeting probability is M, and P is less or equal to M. At the end, we'll have an equilibrium in which P equals to M. Now, one thing is just the definition of marriage. Marriage is a binding commitment to stay together for one period, with no search on the job. Okay. Don't take it literally. Okay, so when they actually observe the quality of match, which, as I said, takes a time, each person can choose whether to stay together or to move. So there's divorce at will. And similarly, there's marriage at will. Now, what is the legal framework? I already said divorce at will. A big issue is the issue of custody. There are many custody arrangements. To make things short, we'll focus on the usual one, the most common one, and it's still dominant arrangement that the mother has custody. And basic reason potentially for that women, in fact, or mothers in particular, not just women, the mother of the child is the best suited to take care of him. Now, we allow for a fixed payment S, which is determined by law. So this is a child support award, which is unconditioned on anything. So the father has to pay it whatever happened. but we assume it cannot be paid directly to the child. It has to be intermediated because the child is supposedly still young. So the issue of whether it's fungible or not, and we take here the positions it's fungible. However, on top of whatever you are forced by law, you can pay extra. So fathers, as I said before, can voluntarily commit on this extra payment sigma, which has this feature that they are conditioned on her not being married. And the reason is this is a payment, as I said, designed to influence her bargaining power, and it's most efficient to pay the money in this way rather than transfer to her money when she's married, because when she's married, part of it is eaten by the new husband. Now, what the allocation features here are very straightforward, but they depend on the household structure. So depend on the household structure, different results can happen, different outcome. If the couple, the two parents may have the child, they remain married, they have a common interest here because now all goods are public, so the amount of child good is simply determined by equating the marginal utility from the child to the marginal utility from the adult good. This determines a certain quantity, which I call the efficient level of child consumption, C star. C star is assumed here to be, of course, to be feasible less than Y plus Z, which Y plus Z is the common family income, but larger than Z. So this brings tension into the model that the mother does not have enough income to support the child at the accustomed level that was within marriage. And that's why transfers become an important issue, because otherwise she could have taken care of the child herself. So some action has to happen even after divorce. General message: in the presence of children, divorce is not the end of the relationship. Okay, you have the child, so you have to somehow to continue to be in a contact or make some arrangement even after divorce. That makes it different, of course, from employment relationship where you can forget about your employer. No, you cannot forget your ex-wife. Now, if the mother remains single, the solution is relatively, she's the agent, she determines how much we'll spend on the child. And because of the quasi-linearity, at low incomes, she'll spend all the income she has on the child. At high incomes, she'll spend up to C stars and the rest on herself. So at some point, the wife stops to spend on the child. At that point, of course, this influences the motivation of the father to give, because he knows that every extra dollar that he gives to her beyond that point will in fact be spent on the mother rather than on the child, because the main motivation to give is to influence the expenditure on the child. We have here kind of an interesting issue, how much he should give. The most difficult case comes when the mother remarries, and one can look at this problem at different points in time, and again, this describes to a particular cut of the problem. People, when they meet and decide to marry, they still are subject to some uncertainty, and the certainty has to do with the remarriage prospect of the exes. So YE is in this notation is the expected income of the father. He is committed to give the mother S, so he has Y minus S. On top of this, he is committed to give her something if she remains single, which is sigma. So the expected income of this person, namely the father, is Y minus S minus 1 minus P sigma. YE minus or minus is the expected income of the new husband with whom she. So the mother remarries. There are two two elements to be kept in mind here. First of all, her ex, and secondly, her new husband. And each one of them has an expected value. So the new husband has y minus s minus 1 minus p times sigma minus e. Now what is sigma minus e is what he owes his ex-wife. So when you remarry, you see that new connections start to be rebuilt, and they can be multiplied depending exactly where you want to stop. But this is the minimum that we need to take into account, the commitment that everyone has. So when remarriage occurs and you marry someone and he has a lot of obligations to his previous wife, he's a less attractive match. He brings less into the marriage. This reduces his bargaining power, and the bargaining outcome reflects that. So to go a little bit quick here, it's a regular Nash bargaining model, but one feature here which is important is the following. This is a graph which determines the bargaining outcome, and it generally depends on how much the father gives and to the remarried wife, and how much the new husband, which is denoted here by sigma minus, is committed to his ex-wife. So the higher is sigma, you see, the better is C. So if the husband committed to give her a lot of money, when she remarries, in the remarried couple, there will be more expenditure on the child because she has a higher bargaining power. And on the other hand, the commitment of the new husband work exactly in the opposite direction. The less commitment he has to his ex-wife, the more attractive he is. Therefore, he will have a higher bargaining power, in which case the expenditure on the child will be lower. This particular graph has this feature that I want to emphasize for the remaining of my time. How much time do I have? All right, so I'll stop very quickly. Which it's the following. The Nash outcome, as I said, can have this convexity property, and you can see here the way we drew it that a particular transfer becomes more effective the more we move to a higher levels of C. So the closer we go to C star, the more willing will be the father to give, because every dollar that he gives becomes more efficient. So the more you give, there's an incentive here to give more, which means that you in general will get into corner solutions. To get exactly into this corner solution issue, we need to talk about the precise interactions, which I don't have time to go. So let me jump here to the nature of the commitment equilibrium. You're going here to, as I said, a major element in the story is that you're willing to give money in this particular commitment depending on the probability of remarriage. The higher the probability of remarriage, the less likely you are to pay, the more likely you are to gain, so the more likely you are willing to commit. So at low levels of P, no one commits. At high levels of P, everyone commits. And in the middles, there are generally two possible cases. One which has to do with complementarity is the one which you see here, that one commits if and only if others do, and does not commit if others don't. And if there's substitution, the only difference is the following, that again at low probabilities no one commits, at high probabilities everyone commits, and in the middle there will be simply no symmetric equilibrium. So if you compare these two graphs, the one on the top has two enforcement mechanisms. One enforcement mechanism is the remarriage rate. The remarriage rate is inducing commitments. Another reinforcement is commitment by others. The second one, with substitution, just has the coordination effects of remarriage, but does not have the reinforcement coming from commitments. Now, divorce here is very simple. You divorce only if you have a bad shock. And let me simply jump here to the equilibrium. Let me first explain. Equilibrium here is simply a fixed point which has the feature that the remarriage rate generated such a divorce rate so that everyone can remarry. And also, this, of course, will depend on the kind of commitment that people take. So it has also to do, you will get a different divorce rate for every remarriage rate depending on whether there will be commitment or there will not be a commitment. So this is, again, something which has to be kept track of. So let me simply describe it through a graph, if I can put it on. Reduce it. I think it's good enough. Okay. So what you have here, and this is sort of the nature of the problem. First of all, I'm looking at symmetric equilibrium. Symmetric equilibria here can be generally of two types. One, of the one in which no one pays, one in which everyone pays. Everyone pays is here limited by incentive compatibility constraint, which I'm not going to describe in detail, but they have the nature that it should be consistent with remarriage. If you commit too much, your wife will prefer to remain single. This is something you don't want. And in this model, so you will stop payment just at this particular point when she's indifferent between marriage and staying single. So one line is the one which goes down with the probability of remarriage is the welfare of the father if he doesn't pay. It declines with the probability of remarriage because if he doesn't pay, when a remarriage occurs, the wife enters into a situation where she has to satisfy the new husband by spending less time on the child. This is bad for the father. He doesn't want to do it. So in this case, or he doesn't enjoy it, in this case, his welfare decline. The blue line is a situation in which everyone pays, and they pay up to the point which induces the efficient expenditure on the child. This is achieved by making the mother just indifferent between marriage and remarriage. At this point, the father, in fact, gains from remarriage. And then we have two other lines, and these other lines have to do with the fixed point with the condition that the outcome should be such that the remarriage rate will in fact induce the appropriate divorce rate. So points which satisfy those are points of intersection with the so-called inverse probability lines which you see here. So there are two potential equilibria, one equilibria on the left and one equilibria on the right. and one has high remarriage, and everyone pays. The other one has a low remarriage, and no one pays. And this is the kind of situation that arises in this model. And to generate this difference, what the shifter here was that I changed exogenously the probability of divorce via raising the shock, the variance of the shocks, and increasing the variance of the shocks in this kind of models is something which is useful for search because of this option value idea in search markets. So the higher is the variance of the shock, the more divorce occur exogenously. People are willing to experiment. But if you have sufficiently large change like this, you move from a low divorce to a high divorce situation. Another way of getting it is simply by having multiple equilibria, which also happen in this type of models. So if you're finally looking at welfare, the nature of this, if you look at the first one, the first row, you have situations. The first row is situation with transfers. The second row is situations without transfers. As you see, they are generated by two variability parameters. The first one is high variability. The other one is low variability. The one with high variability generates a divorce rate of 0.46, remarriage rate of 0.71. Child expenditure are the efficient level here, which is normalized to 1. And in this case, the mother and the father, I don't have time to talk about it, the mother and the father also have the same utility, expected utility. So the solution is not only symmetric, but it's efficient both in terms of the child and in terms of divorce. So there's no issue of inefficient separations here. If you look at the row below, is a situation with in equilibrium there are no transfers. The variability is low, so there's no such incentive to divorce and experiment. The divorce rate here is 30%, the remarriage rate is 50%. The child expenditure on the child are reduced dramatically. By the way, you see I have both expenditure on the child and the expected utility of the child. The expected utility of the child is also influenced by whether there will be remarriage or not. So in this model, when the child is with the mother, the expenditure on the child is different from whether there is a remarriage. So that's why these are different numbers. And the point here is that the child is in fact substantially better off at the high divorce situation. The mother is also better off. What about the father? He's worse off. Okay, but it's not hard. Okay, he pays, and the competition between fathers forces them, of course, to get into this equilibrium. But you can easily get situation where everyone is made better off in the high divorce situation. So that's the message, and the way it happens, just to conclude, is that divorce is a sort of a coordinating mechanism. It causes changes in many dimensions, and the dimension that was emphasized here is the dimension of commitments. You're more willing to commit in such a situation, but many other mechanisms, I think, of this type, legal enforcement, changes in like the guidelines which appear, these are things which actually happened, which have the same feature. So divorce is not all bad. I don't have to tell you. Okay.
So in other words, you're saying with the transfers, it doesn't Pareto dominate. It could be.
It does not in this model because of the symmetry. In models which are symmetric, It's actually Pareto dominant.
This transfer is Pareto dominant.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. The word is love and remarriage. Who married about 9 times, and she said, I married for love, I married for sex, and I married for money. And I can tell you all 3 are highly exaggerated.
Okay, first I just want to say that it's a pleasure to be the discussant for the person who's being honored for this conference. And I think this paper is a good example of why Yoram is worthy of a conference of this caliber. I found this paper to be very interesting. It's on a very important topic. As Yoram pointed out, there's lots of increasing divorce, lots of remarriage. Lots of kids are growing up in families without one of their natural parents. It's a very sensible but complicated model, and they get new results, or at least, and they're very interesting. And at least for me, it changed the way I look at the problem and the solution and the whole issue. So I don't think many papers do that, but I think this one does that. There's a lot of algebra and a lot of equations in this paper, so I'm going to try to restrict my comments to sort of the broad issues that are raised by it. Let me first start off by describing the basic dilemma that I see that they're trying to solve. The basic dilemma is that when people get divorced, the children stay with the ex-wife, and if she gets remarried, this new husband doesn't really care that much about the child in that household. And if the ex-husband sends money to this new household, the new husband has an incentive to eat it for himself and not give it to the child. That's the main problem. And the key insight of the paper is that there's this coordination problem, because every new husband is also an ex-husband, okay? And each of them wants to give money to their ex-wives in order to get it to their kids, but they realize that the other guy is going to eat it. And if you think about it, this is a problem of numbers. Okay, if there were only 2 couples in the world, and that guy's watching my kid and I'm watching his kid, we could probably come to an agreement where he takes care of my, if I send money over there, he gives it to my kid, and if he sends money over here, I give it to his kid. But the problem in the real world is, he's watching my kid, I'm watching someone else's kid, and someone else is watching his kid, and there's no way we can coordinate this all together. So there needs to be some kind of mechanism to get each new kid to each new husband to actually give the money to the kid. And the solution, which I think is pretty ingenious, is that the solution in this paper is to increase the bargaining power of the ex-wife in the used marriage market. So after she's divorced and she's single, if you increase her bargaining power in the remarriage market, she'll be able to force the new husband ex ante to commit to giving the money to the child. I think that's one of the main, as I see, results of the model. And then they go on to actually show you how do you actually increase the bargaining power of the ex-wife in the remarriage market. And their solution is actually for the husband, the ex-husband, to commit to pay the ex-wife more just as long as she's single. So it's like a contingent contract. She gets more money while she's single. She loses it if she gets married. And this way she can demand more from the new husband. And this way she can funnel more money in the second marriage into her own private consumption. Because in the second marriage, the kid is only her own private consumption. It's not the public consumption of the household anymore. And this way the ex-husband can actually successfully transfer money to the child, even if his ex-wife remarries. Now, as more people get divorced, this becomes a more dominant strategy. And why is this? It's because this strategy actually backfires if the ex-wife does not get married. If she doesn't get married, then he's committed to paying her more, and she doesn't get married, and basically she has an incentive just to use this extra money to buy herself new clothes and new cars. It doesn't necessarily go to the new kid, to his kid. So it can backfire if she doesn't remarry, and they have this assumption that as the overall divorce rate increases, it's easier for divorced people to remarry, so there's this market size effect, which I think is sensible. And so as more people get divorced, it's more likely that this strategy is actually going to pay off and not backfire with her remaining single and spending all the money on herself. Now, my comments, first of all, as a primarily empirical person, my comments would be, first of all, what is the empirical evidence? Do we see contracts that are written like this, that are contingent upon the ex-wife staying single? Also, do we see evidence for the problem? I think the problem is pretty reasonable. I think most people would believe that the ex-husband or the new husband is not going to treat the kid the way the ex-husband or the natural parent would. Okay, it's not that he's going to go and starve the kid, but you may see sort of a misallocation of resources. So instead of taking the money and paying for karate lessons, he's going to take the money and buy a bigger TV. So maybe the kid will also enjoy the bigger TV, but he's not going to get the karate lessons, which is really consumption that is specific to the child. Now, evidence for the solution, which is to pay the wife more while she's single. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know really what. I'm not aware of contracts that are contingent on the wife staying single, but maybe we do see it. Maybe we see it in a different form. Maybe we see other ways for the bargaining power, other ways to increase the bargaining power of the ex-wife on the remarriage market. I'm not sure. This is kind of a minor point, but even if we do see that the ex-husband gives more money to the ex-wife as long as she stays single, this is very consistent with their model, but it could be consistent with other models. For instance, it could be that the ex-wife, when she's single, she has very low income, so the ex-husband might want to help the kid by giving them more money so they can live in a better situation. And after she gets married, they have a second income, so he decreases his payment. So there could be an identification problem even if you do see these kinds of contingent contracts. Now, there could be an alternative solution to this problem, which they talk about a little bit in the paper. It could be that the ex-husband just buys specific goods and gives it to the kid. So he could just, buy karate lessons or buy the kid new shoes. And this is probably, you probably do see this in practice, and it's probably a way for people to try to solve this solution. Although this paper highlights why this is probably not a complete solution because money is fungible. Okay, it may be a partial solution because if you buy the kid karate lessons, he's going to get karate lessons. But to the extent that the new husband can sort of take money away from other sorts of things, it's probably going to be just a partial solution. But it may be worth talking about when this can be a full solution, when this is just a partial solution. Now there is an opposing force, actually, which Yoram mentioned. If you pay the ex-wife more while she's single, then she's going to have an incentive to stay single, and that's when this whole solution backfires. Okay. Now, in the model, I didn't really see exactly how you're getting this opposing force because as I saw, the chances of remarrying were really only a function of the overall divorce rate. But in reality, and I guess in the model, you do have this opposing force, and maybe this is why, if they cancel out, maybe this is why we don't see this solution in reality. There also could be an enforcement issue, which is a bit beyond the model, but I was wondering when reading this, how does the ex-wife actually enforce this ex-ante agreement on the new husband? He can always renege on this agreement, or as is done in general in the Middle East, people like to unilaterally renegotiate contracts. In this case, that would be to threaten to divorce her. In the first marriage, the threat of divorce is a little bit less convincing, since each parent actually has an incentive to want to be with the child. and there's the costs of divorce are higher because children are involved. In the second marriage, it's not clear to me that it depends on who has the gains from marriage. It looks to me like the man has more gains to the marriage than the woman, because the woman has a kid in the second marriage, and he also has higher income. So I'm just wondering if there could be an enforcement issue there, and if the ex-husband knows that there's going to be enforcement issues later on down the road, then he's going to be less likely to commit to this solution. I just have a few sort of final and random thoughts. In the model, the ex-husband, it's modeled that the ex-husband gets less utility out of the child's utility if he lives outside the home. And that it seems to be a bit more natural, not to say that the ex-husband doesn't care as much about the child, because that's what it seems to me, but rather that it's more costly to increase the child's utility function. And since I didn't see a lot of interesting results coming out of that delta parameter, maybe if you model it this way, you can get some more interesting results from that parameter. There's also, in reality, this extent to that the ex-husband actually free rides off the new husband. I mean, the new husband, there are a lot of public goods in the household, which it's not just public for the husband and wife, but also the children enjoy public goods. So if the new husband contributes to buying a house and furniture and so forth, the child does benefit from this, and to a certain extent, the ex-husband does free ride off this, and I'm wondering to what extent this can alter or interact with the analysis. There are also these issues which this paper abstracts from, like the time cost of investing in children, utility of spending time with children, utility that the children get from being with their natural parents. The paper abstracts from these issues, and obviously it's beyond the model to model all of these things, but it might be interesting to know in what direction they might interact with the issues here. Because also you have the same problem that in terms of consumption you have in terms of time, because the new husband is probably going to spend less time with the kids than the natural parent would. So to what extent can you solve that problem as well? This question is divorce better for kids, which is talked about a bit in the introduction. First of all, it's not clear to me that this is really the focus of the paper, but also it's not clear to me whether, when you do those calculations, whether you're talking about the welfare of all children or the welfare of just divorced children. Obviously, maybe if you increase the overall divorce rate, maybe the children of divorced parents may be better off, but you have more divorced kids, so it's not clear that the overall welfare of children will be better. I mean, definitely there's this positive effect of replacing bad matches with good matches when the first marriage goes bad. I think the main contribution of this paper to this issue really is to add this new twist that when you have increasing divorce rates, you're more likely to solve this coordination problem. So whether divorced kids whether all kids are really better off or worse off, to me is less relevant than you have this effect, which I never thought about before, that divorced kids are more likely to benefit from solving this coordination problem as the overall divorce rate increases. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Eric. Couple of questions.
And just one, following up on one of the points that Eric made, that the commitment, as I understand it, the commitment in the paper is really cheap talk, but there's nothing binding on it.
Yeah, which one?
The commitment of the second husband to provide certain things of support. And if it's cheap talk, then there's a question about why isn't the bargaining after the marriage effective? I think there's a point that comes up in a lot of models like this.
If you look at the labor market, many job switches take place without intervening spells of unemployment. So if I think about that, you guys have assumed that away in your model. So you can't switch marriages without an intervening spell of unemployment. You have to go through divorce. That was an assumption that you made. That's a key assumption because search externality stuff. So all the stuff that's going on in terms of increasing the divorce rate and the benefit to the kids is going to be a function of that. Now, as a factual matter, I think you're right. There obviously society has a stigma associated with marrying people who are already married. I mean, it happens, but it's rare. And so the question is why. And what I was thinking was that probably the reason for that is something having to do with not internalizing the effects on the kids. That somehow the people might switch and they don't take into account the effects of the kids. But I didn't see that in your model, and it seems to me that if that's the mechanism that prevents it, that's kind of an important thing to bring into the actual calculations and utility. And I just wasn't sure that it's there.
Yeah, 2 points. First, just as a demographic, we were just collecting data on the early boomers who were the participants in the early baby boom, people who were born 1948 to 53. They're now in their 50s. And these were the guys that were basically right up toward the top of the doubling of the divorce rate that you saw. And the fraction of people in the 51 to 56 year age group that were divorced or separated from their current status in 6 years ago was 18%. This wave of the same age group, but now 6 years younger cohort, is 32%. So there's also been a doubling of the non-marital status. Now, so in that sense, I think that's kind of important evidence that suggests that the question that's being addressed in this paper is right on. That is there are a lot of people that do remarry, but there are a lot of people that don't remarry. Then it's of interest to know sort of what are the mechanisms. I guess I'm puzzled by some of the comments on contract compliance. This is sort of a one-sided deal, I think. That is, if I'm the ex-husband and under their model, and in fact, to some extent under the in a kind of realistic situation, I can sort of walk away from payments, particularly as my children get somewhat older, as I move out of state for cost compliance. So the problem is that there's sort of a lot of deadbeat dads around who don't pay. Now, I think this is quite clever because this says, well, suppose that father actually would like to pay. He can observe, if it's simply a flow of payments, he can observe whether she's remarried or not. And so it doesn't seem to me.
No, his comment was what enforced the new husband.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, one more.
Okay, one thing. One of your results is that the welfare of the kid will be better if you have more divorces, because and you are different about yeah, and because the quality of the match would be just one of the arguments, right?
No.
Because they will get more money.
More money, okay. Yes. But yeah, one thing which is not in the matter, which we can think of is about social norm also. So if you have more divorces in the economy, then obviously kids can be better off because of social norm issues. And that's something which we
Alternative stories complement each other.
okay, that's what I was saying.
To respond a little bit?
Yes. First of all, yes, I'll give you the job, so I feel I have to do something, so I'm gonna respond to the question. First of all,
You want to come here? Sure.
First of all, I want to emphasize that here, this is really a bare bone model. So we wanted to be as parsimonious as we could, not only because it's good to be parsimonious in general, but also because this kind of model tend to get very quickly out of control with this social interaction and so forth. So there was a huge constraint, which is we don't want to put too much into the model. And there are plenty of things that have been suggested that could have been put, and actually we did put them in a previous version, and we just got rid of them because they didn't change the basic conclusions, and they were adding just a little bit useless complexity. So in particular, the idea that the child could enjoy the public good as well, this is compatible with this model. It doesn't change the conclusion. And in the same way, decided that the children can use time, which I think is very good and very relevant and it's also compatible with the model in the sense that you can extend the model to this and even do that. So let me try to cover. Thanks a lot for all those comments. They're extremely useful. They're suggestions that we can use. First of all, they're deciding that there might be other reasons for the father to give money to the kids. Definitely, the main reason for the father to give money to the kids when the mother is single is he wants the kid to consume when she's single in real life, right? But we abstract from this, and this is the obvious part. We abstract from this in a sense by assuming that he always gives this that much, and actually whether she's married or not, just because that the law forces him to do. So in our very simple quadrilinear model, the amount the law forces the father to give is such that if she remains single, the amount spent on the kid is exactly the optimal amount. So the model is constructed in such a way that if the only concern was the welfare of the kid when the mother is single, then there is no incentive whatsoever to give any kind of money contingent on her being single. And that's just because we want to concentrate on this additional idea that you might be willing to give money, conditional on the fact that she's single. Despite the fact that you don't want her to get that money when she's single, just because it will help the bargaining when she remarries. And if the remarriage rate is very high, it's cheap because you're unlikely to pay this, and it's very helpful because the situation in which it will make a difference is very likely to take place. So in other words, the structure of this model is there is deciding that you might transfer more than the optimal amount because of this bargaining characterization. The other inside of the model is this idea of social interaction. Now, social interaction, it's what's not surprising is that when you have increasing return to the matching, there are social interaction in the sense that if more people divorce, then you're more likely to divorce because it makes. But what the point we're making here is that if we have this idea of strategic transfer, it magnifies the social interaction because if there are more divorce and remarriage, then you get further incentive to give this additional money. But of course, in turn, the fact that you're giving money makes divorce much likely to take place because the cost of the wife to getting divorced is small. There was a remark in the comments on the fact that if you pay the ex-wife to stay single, it might decrease the probability that she remarries. Actually, in the mechanics of the model, that's an upper limit of the amount you're going to transfer. I mean, in our model, it's very simple because the women are identical. So there is a maximum. The amount will be such that it will not discourage women from remarrying. Of course, with some kind of heterogeneity, it might be an issue, but that's outside. Enforceability. So there are two types of enforceability. First one is how can you enforce the commitment from the former husband to pay, and this is legal. The intuition is it's a binding contract, and you can go to the judge. More difficult question is what about the second marriage? I don't have a very good answer to that, except that we use Nash bargaining. And Nash bargaining, the question is since there is search, there is the surplus. So you have to share the surplus, and natural answer to that is Nash bargaining. Now, what threat point do you take? It seems to us what we really need here is the fact that if she's better off when she's single, this can have only a positive impact on her welfare when she's married. That's what we need, right? Now, the story we say it's not bargaining, and basically there is a commitment. We need some type of commitment, but I think we need some type of commitment anyway if we want to believe in the Nash bargaining story. Like we need some kind of minimum.
Actually, in practice, I think I didn't collect all the data on this, but it's much more common with contract, the pre-nuptial contract, second marriage than the first marriage. So one way of justice to the pre-nuptial contract.
No. If you
And
assume
this
that
will be
it's
then
legal
binding by law.
Yeah.
One last point, which is the answer to Ed's question. So again, my defense on this, I mean, you're right that in a sense the fact that we don't allow on-the-job search is an assumption. First of all, that part of the defense is we want the model to remain as simple as possible. Actually, what's really crucial is that there are some frictions in the sense that when you divorce, you cannot be sure with probability 1 that you will remarry. That's what we want to capture, and that's what's crucial for our model. Now, if you keep this, but you introduce a small probability that actually you won't go to divorce at all, I don't think it changes the qualitative conclusion of the model. I mean, the only thing is we need that it's a risky decision to divorce, at least for some people, and then we look at the first people.
Okay, well, we're exceeding our time, but I think it was spent judiciously. Hi, do you have some announcement about the dinner?
No, during the past waiting, we were taken to the hotel, and then we must get back to the...
For those who don't go by bus, what's the waiting now? What is the dinner and when?
Of his attendance at my 65th this summer, so I have a few months on him, but that's about it. Our friendship goes back to 1978 when we were together at the Institute for Advanced Study in Jerusalem, and since then it's continued in many places, both because we're both labor economists, but because Chicago is a favorite place for him, so we get to see him there, and I'm very honored to talk today. With respect to yesterday's comments, though, I would like to add there were several references to the fact that Yoram's productivity doesn't seem to diminish, and I want to remind you about the law of diminishing returns. It only says that there's diminishing returns eventually.
120.
Yeah. And Yoram just happens to be still on the convex portion of his learning curve. All right, so we have a lot of future with him. And let's see if we can get this thing to work here. All right. Well, actually, productivity growth worker reallocation theory and evidence is a new project of mine, and I suppose let me sort of give you the motivation. I got involved in it through recent interest in work that I've been doing on waste dispersion, realizing when you look at microdata, firm data, that there is a lot of dispersion in wages across firms, and that is associated with dispersion in productivity across firms. And just to give you a brief review of micro evidence on firm productivity, these are 3 points from a recent review article that I didn't write. Domes and other ones did. But labor productivity differences across firms are large and persistent. Associated with those differences, maybe causal or not, the worker flow between firms are large. All right, and finally, there's evidence that worker reallocation associated with that flow from lower to more productive firms is a major source of productivity growth. So those are the facts I start with. What I want to do today is to provide a quantitative theoretical explanation, actually develop a model that can be quantified, and use that model to clarify the role of reallocation in the growth process. So I'm going to sketch a theoretical model. We'll briefly look at some productivity distributions, in this case with Danish firm data. Then sketch the model, which builds on existing work in the literature. At this stage, we do have some initial parameter estimates for that model. The model is a general equilibrium model, so I can use these estimates to quantify and to talk about in quantitative terms some of the implication of the model for growth, for economic growth. All right, so how far I get in this task, I don't know. Well, that's interesting. How did I go to the beginning? There we go. Data. The data that we're using for this project are panel data for a sample of firms, Danish firms 1992 to 97. There are restrictions on this sample. We're looking at firms that are larger than 20. There's further restrictions that we've recently discovered that are going to affect and change our eventual estimates. The main restriction, which is not uncommon, is that smaller firms, namely, in this case, firms between 20 and 50, are 50% of those are sampled, and all large firms are included. These observations are fairly simple at this point: value added, the wage bill, and full-time equivalent measures of employment. Now, the basic characteristics of the data that we're going to start with, and what sort of started, this is joint work, by the way, with Rasmus Lenz, who's at Boston University. Where we started empirically on this was looking at how labor productivity is, what the distribution of labor productivity is, and what's the relationship between labor productivity and various size measures, and I want to show those to you. I keep hitting the N button. Here's what the distribution of labor productivity looks like. I've got two distributions. I'm focused on the one that's a little more dispersed first. That's simply measuring along the horizontal axis output per worker, value added per worker, all right, and distribution over our set of firms. Now, the other distribution is sort of corrected for differences in wage rates. That is, one of the reasons why we're going to see differences in, say, labor productivity across firms is that different firms have different labor forces of different quality. So if we do a quality correction by using wages paid, on the assumption that workers are paid for the quality differences, then you get the second distribution, the one that's a little less skewed, all right, and a little smaller right tail. All right, the point being here that it's not just a matter of differences in worker quality that account for these differences. They account for some of them. It's less skewed, it's less dispersed, but if you look at the numbers, if you look at the fifth percentile in this distribution is half of the median, and the 95th is twice the median, so there's a fourfold difference in labor productivity between the 5th and the 95th percentile. That's what we mean by large dispersion. Okay? Now, I can't learn. A simple theory would say, all right, that firms that are more productive should acquire more resources. Sort of simple basic theory. So we should see some correlation between size and labor productivity. And what's interesting in these data is that there is no correlation between size as measured by employment, those are the lower two panels, and productivity. But there is a significant and positive relationship between value added and productivity, the top two panels, with either measure. All right, and so this observation, in fact, had a big impact on our modeling strategy, because we started with a model which was easily contradicted by these observations. Namely, a sort of standard model where there's differences in TFP, the usual TFP measure in a Cobb-Douglas production function, and that model is going to imply a positive relationship between both measures of size, all right, and productivity. So that one didn't work. What's needed is some form of labor saving, all right, to be consistent with these observations. So the model that we've gone to is a model that the published version has just come out in the JPE by Goette and Sam Kortum, which is an extension, really, of the model of creative destruction growth and creative destruction growth of Grossman and Hellman. It's an extension in the sense that it allows existing firms to develop new products and, as a consequence, grow. All right. So it's a model which is specifically designed to be consistent with distribution of firm size and firm evolution, or the life cycle of firms. Both of these things, both of these characteristics, the fact that there is a distribution of firms, which has a long history of interest, including a famous paper by Lucas, and the fact that firms are born and die are facts that one has to account for, in any case, in empirical analysis of a panel of firms. So this model was particularly attractive. Now, the features of this model is productivity growth occurs through a creative destruction process of intermediate product quality improvements. A firm is born by inventing a marketable product, and then grows by creating more of them into the future, and eventually dies when it's no longer successful at doing so. The firm size and productivity reflect then the realizations of past innovation decisions, and R&D decisions are based on firms' expectations about future productivity. Those are the characteristics of the model. Observed firm productivity reflect those of current products. All right, and so our notion here is that if past product quality is correlated or predicts future product quality, then firms with that have high labor productivity now can expect to, will expect and will invest in future growth. So that's sort of the basis of what's going on. And as I say, this model is consistent with firm size, can explain firm size distribution and so forth. All right, so the model is going to allow for firms that are heterogeneous with respect to the quality of the product that they produce and the future products that they will produce. So there's a correlation or persistence over time in the quality of their products. Now, you can think of this in the various ways, like Intel, for example, inventing successful or a series of higher quality chips. But I also like to think of it in terms of, say, a Walmart firm, all right, that comes along and is just better at retailing, all right, and then grows through expanding the number of its retail outlets. I think, in fact, a lot of ways, this model fits that example, maybe even better in some ways. Oh, using somebody else's computer. All right. Now, the general equilibrium model is closely related. In fact, it's based on Grossman-Hellman, with this one added feature that in their book, in this chapter 3 of the book, firms just invent a single product, produce that product until their product is replaced by somebody else's, and then they die. The extension, the Goette extension, is that firms enter in that same way by inventing a profitable product. Then they continue to invent profitable products, and through that process grow or not, all right? Because all the time their existing products are subject to product destruction risk, somebody else inventing something better than theirs, all right? So the Grossman-Heltman setup is you've got a simple production function. There's a continuum of intermediate products indexed here by J. You've got a simple Cobb-Douglas production function with unit elasticities, and which determine the output of the consumption good. That's the second equation. Now, the inputs into the production of a final good is the product of quantity and quality of the products, so A and X, and quality is determined by a process of quality improvement. Each new product builds on the shoulders of the past, or I guess the term is building on the shoulders of giants. So the current quality is the product of the Q's over past product inventions from the first to the current, J, T, J. So JT of J is the number of innovations at day T, and Q, the parameter Q, is greater than 1. That's just the step size, the extent to which productivity is improved by each successive invention. By assumption, each new producer of the higher quality product has a monopoly position, at least, but that monopoly position is conditioned by competition with other products, and also the provider of the last product of similar kind limits the extent to which prices can be set. In this particular formulation, in fact, prices have to be set by a limit pricing, so that the new innovator sets a price that makes his product just equivalent, from the consumer's point of view, to the previous one by marking up the price above the cost of producing that, the previous one, by the extent of the quality improvement. So there's pure compensating differential between the price of the new and the old product. Price is equal to, I'm going to drop here the subscripts both time and product, because the symmetry of the problem is going to allow that. So price is just marked up over the marginal cost. In this particular model, the only labor input, only labor is the only input, so the marginal cost is just the wage W, and so the cost of the previous supplier is W. You mark up that cost by the quality improvement Q. All right. Given that pricing rule, there's a one-to-one relationship between profitability pi and product quality, given by the second equation. Just do. One more point. Given the form of the utility function, it's optimal to spread consumption evenly across all the products. That leads to the demand function Px equals 1. We're just normalizing that. So with those two equations, one generates the profit function on the bottom.
Seems like the rate of change or growth quality.
Q. Yeah, right. It's the proportional increase in quality from one product to the other. Sorry. Well, you could think of it that way, or at the moment, you could think of it that way, and that this is just, given the realization, this is the product rule. No learning curve with me. All right. Now, once we're, now we go to the firm, all right? I've already expressed the pricing rule and the relationship between the product quality, the quality of a particular product, and the profit made on it. At this point, you can think of either Q or pi, but I'm going to use pi to indicate the type of product. Type in the sense of that's all that matters. is its profitability from a firm's point of view. Now look at the firm's decision problem. The firm, first of all, the setup is to suppose that the firm can grow by producing more or a new product. And the assumption will be that that in a short period of time it's only going to invent one. And in a short period of time it's only going to lose through creative destruction one product. So that one can think of the state of the firm as the number of products, and that state is a random variable but of the birth-death type. In a short interval you can only gain one product or lose one product. And this birth-death structure simplifies considerably the characterization of the firm's problem. So what the firm is doing is making an investment decision, whether that investment decision doesn't determine with certainty that it will obtain a new product. Instead, it determines, like as in patent race literature, the probability, all right, or the arrival rate of new products. So, under the structure assumed in the offer arrival rate is some number. I'm going to characterize it as gamma times k, but that's the decision how big to make gamma times k, subject to a cost of investing in R&D, and that cost function is homogeneous to degree 1 in the investment rate, the arrival rate, and the current level of capital, to put in quotes, the number of products k. So this is a constant returns structure. For those of you who are familiar with, some of the room are very familiar with the old cost of adjustment literature, this is a structure that's going to give us essentially constant growth rates that are independent of the state, which in this case is k. All right, so the decision is what should gamma be given this investment cost structure, and the depreciation rate delta here is the rate at which you lose product lines through the innovation of other firms. So there's creative destruction in the sense that a new product of your type by somebody else is going to have a higher quality and you're going to lose that product line. Okay? So that means the transition rate from k to k plus 1 is lambda k, and from k to k minus 1 is delta k, and you're moving up and down the integers. Okay. The value of the firm for this problem is for any k, conditioned on k and information about the future, which I guess is implicit in this value function down below. That's explicit in the paper. The value of the firm is v sub k of pi. Now, at this stage, for this value function, I've made a big shift. Bob is right. I could characterize the q that's going to be realized as a random variable, all right, and that's worked out in the paper what the value function looks like. From here on, I'm going to assume that firms are just distinguished by the quality of product. It's a persistent, it's a deterministic characteristic of a firm, all right? And when the firm is born, that characteristic is realized. And we'll see that it's unknown until entry, but that'll come a bit later. So this value function, all right, is valid for the case in which a firm knows that it's of type pi, and its future products will be of type pi, as well as its current products. But more generally, we don't have to make that assumption. All right, so the first term is just the current cash flow. Given that you've got k products, it's just the profit you made on those k products. The second term is the expected capital gain associated with the arrival of a new product. The arrival rate gamma k, and your value, your number of products goes up by 1, and the last term is the capital loss associated with the loss of the product. Delta k is the rate at which you lose products, and the difference is the capital change, value change. All right. All right. So the decision problem is one of condition on K and your type pi, what should your creation rate be? I'll call gamma the creation rate. All right, and that solves a simple. In this particular deterministic case, it solves the problem implicit in the solution. You show that this is the solution to the value function, namely that the value function is linear in K. All right, and that the solution for the value function is the right-hand side, but then the optimal decision, investment decision, is a solution to that problem. All right, implicitly there. So the first order condition in this particular case is to equate the marginal cost of investment, all right, to the expected change in value. All right, the increase in value associated with the arrival of a new product. Perfectly straightforward, which is the right-hand side. And from that, you immediately deduce the not surprising fact that more profitable firms that produce higher quality products, which are more profitable, will be firms that create products at a higher rate. And they're going to be the ones that grow relatively faster. Then the other consequence is a higher economy-wide destruction rate. Delta is both creation, right, is the economy-wide rate at which new products are created. It's also the risk of losing your current product. Value is going to decrease with that because it's the effective depreciation rate for each firm. And, of course, profit's going to fall with the wage. So investments are going to fall in with respect to those two variables. Now, in the general equilibrium model, which we're coming to, delta is going to be endogenous, all right, as is the wage. All right, but at this stage, they're taken as given by each firm. So we're just characterizing. I'm going to put a piece of tape over that button. Now, to characterize equilibrium, we're going to have to talk about how the distribution of firms, all right, with respect to size is generated. Now, that for each firm, that's a dynamic process. But from the point of view of the economy at large, there'll be a steady state and there'll be a fixed number of firms of each size of each type. All right? And the steady state equations here that I'm going to introduce now are going to characterize what that steady state distribution of firms by type is. The joint, in other words, distribution of size type distribution. All right, let M sub K of pi be the mass of firms that have K products that are type pi. All right, and then the steady state equation is just equate the steady state distribution is that which such that the flows in and out of that type, in and out of that category are equal, and that's what these equations are. In order to have K firms now, you have either had to have the flow in to that category is the flow of firms that were of type K minus 1, and they added a product. So the first term is just the flow of firms into that group. Right. And why is the other term there? No. Yeah. Anyway, those are the steady state conditions. I'm not going to go through them any more detail. From the steady state conditions, one can, by induction, simply solve the difference equation. These will give you a set of difference equations. Solve the difference equation for the steady state mass. It's really a measure of firms of type K of firms of size K of type pi, which is down below. And this distribution, for example, implies a Pareto tail and various properties which are consistent with observation. All right, now to complete the description of the general equilibrium model, I have to talk about entry. Firms don't know who they are when they enter, but in the simple version, they find out immediately after they enter. All right, so those firms are going to equate the cost of entry, which is on the right-hand side. The interpretation, this again is Helmut Grossman, firms use labor input to generate new product ideas. The length of time it takes, or the frequency, H is the entry frequency, so the average length of time it takes to invent a new product for entry is 1 over H time, and that times the wage rate's the cost, and that's equated to the expected value of entering, which is on the far left-hand side. If you enter, you're going to have one product, you're of type pi, you don't know what that is until entry, so you take the expectation with respect to the given exogenous distribution of types at entry. All right, so you draw a type as you enter. Okay, and that's going to be a fundamental of the model. So the model doesn't really explain why firms are different. All right, there's the exogenous assumption of how they're different. What the model does is talk about given differences at birth, how firms are selected in the future, because more productive firms are going to grow faster, they're less likely to die in the future, they're going to become larger. All right, so the model talks about the dynamic selection process after birth. All right, and the steady state distribution that I just gave you is the characterization of the outcome of that selection process. All right. The assumption of the model is that there's a fixed unit measure of products, so every product that's created, there's a corresponding existing product that's been destroyed. All right? So the destruction rate is equal to the aggregate rate at which new products are created, and that's the sum of products created at entry, which is eta, an endogenous variable, and the sum of all the rates of creation by existing firms, which is the second term. All right. Each firm of type pi creates new products at rate pi, or gamma times k, and there's mk of pi of those firms, in steady state at least. So this characterizes what the steady state creation rate is. The associated rate of growth in consumption, I can go back to the original specification and derive this equation. For those of you who are used to this model, you know it's the economy-wide product arrival rate, which is delta times the average quality of new products. All right, and that, in terms of this specific model, can be written out as the thing on the right-hand side. All right, and the way in which the sort of micro estimation is linked to the macro analysis is that we're going to use the micro data to estimate the relevant quantities in this equation on the right. All right, and then be able to substitute that in and generate the aggregate growth rate. Finally, but we're not fully describing the equilibrium. We also had to determine the wage rate. There are two sources of demand for the wage, for labor, production labor, which is the first term, and R&D labor. And labor here, I haven't stated it, but is explicitly identical, and you can use it for either purpose. So the right-hand side is the demand for labor, equated to an inelastically supplied quantity, L. All right. And that's the description of the economy. Now, an equilibrium is a steady-state labor, or steady-state equilibrium is a triple W, an entry rate eta, creative destruction rate delta, that satisfies free entry, market clearing, and optimal choice of creation rates for each type. And we have an existence proof. If the cost of creation is convex, strictly convex, and some other regularity conditions are true, then an equilibrium exists, provided that there's enough labor around. And the reason for the requirement to be enough labor around is that there's a fixed input requirement for product being produced, all right, and you have to have enough labor of that for production before you have enough labor around in order to use it for investment in R&D, all right. So there's some there's some minimum labor requirement that's required for positive R&D, all right. That's the basic story there. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
All right, so I better not go through. Here's a picture of what, of the logic of the equilibrium proof. You can go through that in the paper. What I wanted to do, spend the last 10 minutes, is briefly some of the empirical implications of the model and the estimate. First of all, the model implies that there's a positive relationship between this particular measure of productivity, which is not exactly labor productivity, all right, pi, and value-added size measured as value-added, but not necessarily a monotonic relationship between employment size and this measure of productivity. And the reason for that is that there is labor saving. The demand for a product is P times Q is fixed, all right, because of the specification. And the supplier of a higher quality product can charge a higher price. So the quantity that supplied of a higher product, quality product is smaller, all right, therefore requires less labor input. And as a consequence, this first term, you can see, is decreasing in pi. The labor requirement to supply the product is decreasing in pi. As a consequence, there's no monotonic implication. That's the labor-saving feature of the model. But as a consequence, this model is consistent with our data. And in the empirical specification, we add a few things. We add some noise to product quality. We add some sort of noise to the size of the demand for each product, and we add a cost of capital, because otherwise our rents would be too big to explain the investment we see. All right. Essentially, we need a cost of capital to get the wage share to be consistent with the data. All right. And the implied capital cost is consistent with what we believe. So you can just simply think of that as saying that, as before, I think in Bob's model, labor is the only input, but it's required. You need the tools for that, for those workers. All right. Then we do the estimation using methods of simulated moments. This model is particularly nice for that because it's explicitly stochastic model, so we explicitly can simulate in a stochastic way a sample of firms and use that and compare the moments associated with particular parameter values with the actual data moments in our estimation procedure. C will say something about that. And then the other details of the specification, we do parameterize the cost function. It's a power function. The wage, we don't estimate. We take this quality adjusted labor force seriously, and we just simply estimate the wage by using the average wage in the data. But the average wage is the sum of the wage bills over all the firms divided by employment. So that's a sort of corrected wage. We fix the interest rate. We could estimate it, but we believe we have strong priors about what the interest rate should be. So we fix those. We add this capital cost parameter and initial estimates of our parameters are there. And then we allow for discrete distribution of types. All right. And in this particular estimation, we allowed for 4 different types. And the sort of profitability of each of the types are given there, pi 1 through pi 4. The numbers of firms of each type, and I've forgotten whether these probabilities are the steady state probabilities or the offer probabilities, or the entry probabilities. And C0 is the scale parameter of the cost function. C1, 1 plus C1 is the power of the cost function. So we've got a very steeply sloped marginal cost of investment implied by the firm. Delta is the destruction rate, okay, so forth. In the few minutes, there's something about model fit in the paper, which I'm not going to have time for, except to illustrate this picture, or just to compare what our estimated distribution of labor productivity and the relationship between productivity and our two size measures are relative to the data are given in these pictures. I think the red lines are the red lines are the data, and the black lines are the estimates. All right, just to show we can fit those two properties of the data. Now I want to spend the last couple minutes on the quantitative growth decomposition. The growth equation, which I gave earlier, can be written in this form. And what the purpose of this is to talk about how firm selection, how this selection process, these differential growth rates on firms affect the aggregate growth rate. And this is so the first equation is just derived from the model. The second equation is a decomposition along the following lines. The first part is the growth due to entrants. The second part is the growth due to incumbents if there were no selection, if there were no size selection. In other words, if all firms grew at the same rate. All right? Because then the initial distribution of types, the fees, would also be the steady state distribution if they all grew at the same rate. The last term is the contribution to growth associated with differential growth rates across firms. And the term in parentheses there is the difference between the steady state distribution of firms of that type and the entry distribution. Phi is the entry, right, is the fraction of firms of that type. Phi times 8 over delta minus phi from our steady state derivation is the fraction of firms of that type, all right, in the steady state distribution. Okay, so this last term is positive if and only if, all right, higher type firms, higher pi firms grow faster, all right? So that's what I call reallocation. That's the growth associated with reallocating labor from the slow-growing firms to the fast-growing firms over their typical lifespan. All right, so in that sense, it is associated with reallocation. And the implied growth rate here should say, is high. All right, and I suspect is biased up by the fact that we haven't fully accounted for our sample selection. All right. But what I want to point out here is the sort of the relative contributions of these three terms. Entries, 22%. Growth due to incumbents without selection is a little over 50%. And then 25% of the growth is due to, you can either think of it as firm size selection process or the associated reallocation of workers from slow-growing to fast-growing firms. Right, that goes on implicitly in this firm. So that suggests that there's at least equal to entry allocation. This selection process is at least as important as entry as a contribution to growth.
Do you have the number for expected life of the firm?
Yeah. It's all in there. Do I have it on top of my head? No. Each firm type, the expected life of the firm is delta minus gamma of pi. All right. Now I can't get the... One more slide. I can't get to it. The other point, of course, of doing a general equilibrium model is you can deal with this Planner's problem, and I want to take a few minutes there. Too few seconds. That's all I need. For those of you who are familiar with the Heltman-Grossman model, you know that the equilibrium growth rate's not efficient, and there's several sources of inefficiency. One is the monopoly pricing, right? One is the positive spillover. The fact that the productivity of a new product depends on the productivity of the previous product, and that isn't priced in the system. And then there's one other externality too. There is not a monotonic relationship between, or whether or not the relationship between the optimal or the solution to the Planner's problem and the equilibrium depends on how big Q is. I think in the model for small Qs and large Qs, there's not enough growth, and for intermediate crews, there's too much. Here, pardon? Yeah, well, sorry. That's a sort of simple model in chapter 3 of the book, all right, where all firms have the same queue. All right, here we've added the further complication that we've got different queues across types. So that adds furthermore. So analytically, it's hard to compare the two. But I can solve the planner's problem. All right, now that I have all the parameters estimated, solve the planner's problem. We do. There's the planner's problem. It's a dynamic control problem. Here's the relationship between what the equilibrium values, our estimated equilibrium values of the various parameters, and the solution to the planner's problem. And the solution to the planner's problem says that there's too little growth. All right? And there's too little growth in this economy primarily because there's too little entry. All right? In fact, almost all of it's in the entry. The actual creation rates of the various firm types are hardly changed. There's a particular reason in the model why that's true. But the parameter estimates suggest there should be a lot more entry. All right. Okay. So that's the sort of model, rough description of the estimation, and only a suggestion of how one might be able to apply the model. I guess the bottom line is obviously there's a lot more work to be done.
Thank you very much. Everybody who knows Dale knows he will do the work. It's not just an excuse. Our discussion is
a new research line for the authors. It's certainly for me, and I wanted to learn it. Unfortunately, I allocated not enough time for this priorly, so I would try to make it quickly what I learned. I think learning on the joint dispersion of firms' output, productivity, employment, and wages, and then really what I hope to learn, I mean, as a labor economist, is I thought learning about mobility and mobility of workers, mobility and the labor market, and I guess this is the research plan of the authors. Let me just summarize. I think what is nice, this research starts from data. I mean, they have about 6,700 firms. They choose out of this around 4,800 to learn about their productivity dispersion per worker and growth, size by output and employment, mobility by entry and exit, but at the end they haven't used that, and wages, and that's eventually going into the employment dynamics. So this is sort of the research plan, and what we have seen is just the beginning, the first two lines, I mean the productivity dispersion and the size. And I want just to show you, I want to come back to the picture which I like the most in the paper. I couldn't put it into my system, so I guess I can get it into Dale. This is
go to the top.
This one. So you can see it nice. I think this is the red line is the data, and that's where research starts. And I think what is I mean, the fact that we have this positive, that higher productivity as a larger size, I think it's a common fact, and that you have to feed that. But the fact that employment is going down here, that's not easy to produce a model that will get that. And I think this is the choice of the model that they made, is the model where high productivity firms have low employment and high profits. This stuff, it was not obvious to me that every model can get. It's really the growth model that they have chosen could get it, and the fact that they could get it so nice, eventually, I think, is the success of this research and the success of this particular. But I want to say that the starting point is these data graphs, and to get into the red ones and to get into the black one is basically the way I like very much this paper. Now, how they get it, just to make it a very simple, my summary, just the way I understand it, is that the model is basically an extending model of differentiated product, generate growth and entry by new products motivated by monopoly profits. And this is the Grossman-Helpman. And then there is this additional creation is determined by as an R&D investment decision under uncertainty. So you choose this creation rate endogenously, as they'll describe it. The firm choose the creation. And then the creation rate multiplied the previous number of products is basically a Poisson arrival rate that generate dispersion. And then different firms end up with different number of products, and number of products is the size, and the process is basically stochastic, and that's allow you to get this dispersion. Then they solve just I just summarized. Then they solve the steady state, where entry rate and destruction rate has to adjust just to keep the measure of firms equal to 1, and all the size of the workforce is employed, so there is a full employment. So really the labor market is a very simple, trivial, silent part of the model so far. So, I jumped. I was not sure.
You hit the end button like I was doing all the time.
What do I do? Okay, so what are the results? The results is a simple analytical derivations of the equilibrium. I think it's a very important feature of the problem, so they don't have to solve numerically. The other part that they'll describe is that the size of the firm as measured by K is increasing with profits, and productivity is increasing with profit and increasing with size, so that's give you the main feature of the data. And then, actually, it's very nice that the productivity can be decomposed. He did it at the end, but it's actually coming directly from the equilibrium, is that this productivity growth can be decomposed directly, analytically from the model on 3 parts. It's the increase of entry, basically new products, and then the within-firm reallocation of workers, and then between firms depends on this on all this process, and that's a nice decomposition that could be directly related to the data. Well, the main shortcoming of the paper, from my point of view, is really that the labor market dynamics, and actually the firm dynamics I will talk about, has not been explored so far in the paper, and maybe this... I want to say a few words about the way the estimation is done. So basically, in some sense, the key question is how you take this model and fit it to the data, and what do you do, how you get the parameters conditional on the data, and then how you sort of check out of what you use to impose on the model. So I want to spend a few words about that. The way they estimate the parameters is using a simulated GMM. They start with 4 different levels of pi. So this is 4 levels of... So they have 4 levels of pi. They have... and this each pi come with a discrete probability pj. So they allow for that in the model, the 4 types. But then they calculate from the model the change in K starting from a steady state, as if all firms had a steady state. Then they assume some parametric equation to this cost function of choosing the arrival rate of new product, gamma, which is endogenous in the model. Then capital stock, and there is a Z which related to the data is chose as a parameter to be estimated. And then delta is the destruction rate is estimated from the model. So basically, what they do is they have 2 equations. The log of value added is just directly related to the log of K, which is endogenously evolved from the model as a process starting from a steady state, and the model is fully described K. So the key relationship that comes from the model is the process that describe K, and that enters into the value added and the wages. And it ended fully consistent with the structure of the model, with two little deviations, is these two little epsilons to get them a little bit more shocks. And then basically what they do is they estimate the parameters by minimizing a distance between the mean of y and w, and then the covariance between y and w. So they do not impose on the model, for example, to fit this decreasing labor number of workers at the end. So that's certainly should this fit, and the slope of this, how slope will be, is really coming from the model. And that's, I think, what is nice is that they are able to fit up the parameters to these moments with this simple framework. But then the results are that the estimation results that the value added and productivity are positively correlated, that the model fits well the main cross-section moments, and productivity growth can be decomposed and give you numbers, as Dale showed you, which seems reasonable. What are my main comments quickly? Since all workers are the same, you may want to look at firms with relatively homogeneous workers. You have a huge, you have 4,800 you are using. You can certainly reduce the number of firms into different sectors and see, for example, if you look at different products like construction, retail stores, and manufacturing, whether this model and how the parameters differ between this model, and whether this make sense on this dimension. And in this sense, also you could actually think about the different exercises, actually estimating the parameters on one sector and see whether that fits this other sector. So is there is a similarity when we assume as if this process is very similar across different sectors, and to see how the model differ between these sectors, I think, would be an interesting additional exercise. There is a question about R&D. Most firms don't do R&D, so this is this creation. You may want, maybe it's a name, but I think one want to think kind of common sense. What do we really mean? Like, is it Walmart having more stores, or what do you mean by new products of retail stores? What is the story behind this gamma, and how that fits in most of the growth in the economy in terms of number of products and growth in size is the sales sector and the services sector. It's not the manufacturing. Manufacturing is actually reducing, and therefore I think this comparison. And then I think the one thing which is important is to look at the dynamics. You haven't used the transition moments. You haven't used any moments about. Yoram asked you about the entry. There is one.
No, there is one.
There is one moment. But there is a productivity change and labor change. So there are moments that you have not used. And one way to think about whether this is a dynamic model. So the question is, by fitting this cross-section and getting this pinned down the parameters, this is, I think, the miracle usually is, do we fit well other moments where we haven't looked at all in the model? And this is sort of like a test of the... I think overall I want to say one word about search equilibrium theory. I'm done. Okay. Search equilibrium theory and related empirical work, as Dale said at the opening, show that the main source for wage dispersion among observed homogeneous workers is coming from productivity difference across firms. It's both in the theory and both empirical work that has been done in search and other, structural and non-structural, that, log wage equations, Mincer equation has R square of 0.3, and when you have match when you have match data from firms, then you can, in different ways, whether you impose a structure or not, then almost as productivity of different productivities across firms can explain a lot of the wage dispersion. So having a different theory of productivity dispersion across firms, I think, is very important to really connect these two. And this is basically the agenda that Dale is on, and I think this is basically what I mean, taking this work of Gleda and Kortum and Eaton and Kortum, and actually to some extent I think also the work on I/O in general that Pecos and Barry and Pecos have been working, and combining that with a friction labor market such as Mortensen search theory. I sent students to match the two. No one did, and here is a good beginning. And maybe I will get there if I will be on my convex learning as Yoram in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a few questions from the audience.
So, this is probably a bad question, but if we think about Grossman and Heltman as a model of plants, and then these firms of yours, are they kind of like bundles of Grossman and Heltman plants?
That's one way to think of it, yeah. I like to, or stores. Or stores.
So in this common, so K firms sort of operating in K different markets.
That's the model.
So how come we get the same pie across all these K markets?
No, the pie is associated with a firm. All right, so Walmart produces stores faster, all right, than Kmart is the analogy, all right. In fact, and as a consequence, Kmart's about to die, and Walmart's growing.
Wrong,
It's a difference.
it's just a bundling of Grossman and Heltman's bundling. It depends on who does the bundling.
Yeah, depends on who does the bundle. That's the idea. Why there are these differences?
Okay.
Yeah,
Figure out the model.
yeah, that's just the model. And of course, we can reject that it wasn't mentioned, but we can. All right, it's possible that all these firms are identical, and they're not, and the data says they're not.
Right. Alex.
I might have missed something. Is there a distinction between wages in the research development?
No. At this point, labor is perfectly fungible. You use it for either purpose. That's obviously a gross abstraction. Right? Particularly in the dynamics, because...
in particular, it involves the assumption that all workers are homogeneous, not only within each group, but across the research development.
That's right.
And the traditional groups, right?
Right.
Yoram? Denmark is a small country, and probably some of the R&D happens abroad.
Right.
I don't know how you correct for this when you go to the data. Like, would you distinguish between industries which are local industries and export?
Well, let me first of all, the issue came up. To answer that question, Zvi's suggestion about estimating the model on industries, which we can do, and in fact we've done some preliminary work on, suggests that some of the parameter estimates do vary by industry, but the basic qualitative properties of the data are the same across industries. So it turns out we can fit the model industry by industry. Now, attributing the source of growth, the only, in this model, of course, innovation is the only source of growth, so we're abstracting from all other possibilities. Empirically, we can do a little bit of correction, and we've done some correction to that by allowing for a common growth rate in wage levels and value added. All right. Let's say there's some, exogenous factor improving growth, either coming from foreign sources or otherwise. All right. We can identify that to the extent that it's built into the wage level. All right. Mm-hmm. Replacement by, so you're really worried about the assumption that we have a closed economy. Right. And we haven't worried about that, but you're absolutely right. That's
Okay, we'll have our next speaker is Eddie. Eddie is going to teach us something useful about speeding, tax fraud, and teaching tests.
That's fine. There's one over there.
Dale, you know, I think I need your, Dale, I think I need your.
Oh, yeah.
The paper has a kind of a strange title. It's primarily about education and teaching to the test. The speeding and tax fraud turn out to be applications that are more metaphors, but formally equivalent. And so let me motivate this basic question here. This came up, I'm on a board with a couple of other guys involved in trying to set standards for educational testing in the United States. And this is a very important question right now, particularly because of some of the policies associated with a program that we call No Child Left Behind. But it's not unique to the United States. It actually is important in Israel too. I was flying in and read an article in the Jerusalem Post about how test scores had recently gone up in the TIMSS, which is the International Study of Math and Sciences. And you know, they were talking about how this was in large part a response to some of the innovations that had taken place in Israeli education and some of the emphasis placed on incentives in schools. And so the question is that a good thing to do or a bad thing? And I have two colleagues who are on this board with me, and they got into this argument about this. And one of them, a guy named Dan Koretz, who is a psychometrician at Harvard, has spent his career basically documenting that if you change a test, what happens is people will end up teaching to it. So the best evidence for this is you have a test, like students are given a particular test like the NAEP or the Stanines or some particular test, and then you switch to the other test, similar kind of test, but another test, and the test scores go down for that school. And then over the next 3 years, what you see is the test scores rise. Then you switch back to the first test, and the test scores drop. So that's pretty good evidence that what's happening is the teachers are trying to focus on that particular test. And he's very worried about that and views that as one of the really adverse consequences of imposing high-stakes tests, that people will come in and just teach the material on the test. Well, there's this other guy, Chris Edley, who was at Harvard, was a law professor at Harvard, now is the dean of the Berkeley Law School. And he said, well, you know, look, that may be true, but the kids I'm thinking about, you know, I'm happy if these guys can even read the test, you know, much less, I'm not worried about these sort of second-order creativity issues. So, you know, if they can even read the test, if this mechanism induces these guys to learn that material, then I'm happy. So the question is, which guy is right? And the same thing, again, relates to this issue in Israel, because if it was the case that these incentives were put in, and as a result now Israeli students are learning to take these tests better, the question is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? You know, is that something we want to praise or is that something we want to worry about? So I want to present a model for thinking about that problem and try to give you some implications about the circumstances under which we're going to like that kind of a thing where people actually do teach to the test, and the conditions under which we're going to be unhappy about that, and then talk about some of the ways we can think about the policy. All right. Well, what's the relation of this work to Yoram? It turns out there actually is some. And Yoram's done a lot of work actually in his career on education. I went back and looked at a few of his papers on it. Now, most of Yoram's work focuses on really the risk aspect of education and the risk-return aspect of it. So his early work was on choice of areas of specialization based on the risk associated with those particular fields. The paper with Lavari is on choosing between investing in risky human capital and safe physical capital. And then the more recent one in the JPE was on education reducing earnings variance. So what's common in this paper with Yoram's work is that I'm going to also be thinking about educational payoffs as being stochastic. What's going to be different is that I'm not really focusing on the risk aspect at all. I'm going to just assume risk neutrality. So in that sense, it's going to be a deviation from Yoram's earlier work, but there is actually some relation. I was kind of worried that there might be none, but it turns out that there is. So, all right, well, let me give you the analogy. As I said, that the way I was thinking about this when these guys are talking about it, it's kind of a little bit bizarre, but hopefully I can convince you that it makes sense. And the way I thought about it was the following. I said, well, this problem is kind of like the issue of whether you should announce where the cops are on the road. And the idea is, suppose you're trying to deter speeding, and you ask people, should you tell people where the police are? Well, your first reaction would be, well, of course you don't tell people where the police are. That's stupid. If you tell people where the police are, what will happen is people will obey the law where they know the police are, and they'll speed everywhere else. And that's true. But suppose you don't tell people where the police are. Well, if there are few enough police, what might happen is people will just say, heck with it, I'm going to take my chances and I'm going to speed everywhere. So if what you're trying to do is reduce the amount of speeding, then by announcing where the cops are in that particular situation, you could actually get less speeding than you would if you didn't announce it at all. Okay? And that's going to be the basic idea. That's the same intuition that I'm going to have here, because announcing the questions on the exam is like telling you where the police are. Okay? And so that's going to be that's really the intuition behind the whole model. Tax fraud is similar. You think about, should I announce the rules? Should I announce what I'm going to audit or not? And again, your first intuition would be, it's stupid. Don't announce what's going to audit, because then people will just be careful on those items and then they'll ignore everything else. But again, it's the same intuition that if you can't catch them on anything, at least if you announce those things, maybe they'll obey the law on those few items. But it turns out it's slightly more complicated than that, particularly in the context of tax. Anyway, that's the intuition. So you pretty much already know the story. Let me start with the model of speeding, because I think it's sort of the simplest way and the cleanest way to think about it, and I'll quickly switch to education, which is, as I say, the main thrust of the paper. Think about the V being the utility value of speeding. So you like to speed, it's kind of fun, and that's the value V that you get from it. G is going to be the number of police, and just assume that each cop can patrol 1 mile, and there are Z total miles available. K is the fine that you're assessed for speeding, and I'm going to take that as exogenous. Now, in most of this optimal enforcement of the law, determining K is a very important part of the problem. For my purposes, for most of the analysis, particularly when we're talking about the amount that teachers are punished when their kids do badly, we're going to be able to take that as exogenous. We can think of sort of more complicated mechanism design problems, but I'm going to shy away from that in this paper. Don't worry about Q and X for right now. We'll come back to it. Okay, so let's suppose that I announce the location of the police. Well, what are you going to do? Well, we know on the miles where the cops are not, that is the Z minus G miles, all the miles where they are not, you're going to speed. But on the miles where they are, you'll say, I will speed, I will not speed, I'll obey the law if the fine, which I'm going to pay with certainty because the cop is there, if the fine is greater than the utility value from speeding. So that's the condition for not speeding if I know that the police are sitting on this particular mile. Now let's say I don't announce where the police are. All right, well now I've got to take into account the probability of being caught. There are G miles that are being patrolled of the Z total miles, and the fine is K, so this is my expected fine. So I won't speed if my expected fine is greater than my benefit from speeding. Now, since G over Z is less than 1 in general, it's possible that this condition holds. Now, if this condition holds, what does this say? This says that if I don't announce, you would speed everywhere, right? But if I do announce, what will happen is you will opt to obey the law on those few miles. And that was the intuition that I gave you right at the beginning. So that's just a simple version of that condition. All right. So, all right, that's what I just said. So what are the implications of this story? Well, the implications are that you're going to want to announce where the police are if it's very expensive to patrol. So if there are very few cops around, if G is a small number, then that condition is more likely to hold. It's going to be more likely to be the case that people are going to end up speeding everywhere, so you better tell them where the cops are. Turns out, by the way, this never occurred to me until I started working on this problem, and then I started listening to the news in the morning, and in California in the news, every morning now they announce where the cops are. I couldn't believe it. The local news says, okay, on Interstate 280 between San Jose and San Francisco, there's going to be beefed up patrol today because we want to slow people down. I thought, what are they doing that for? And so this at least gives a rationale for that. They did on the 4th of July weekend, they said they're going to be patrolling Interstate 80 between San Francisco and Reno. So they do this. But the intuition here, again, is that if there were only one cop in Israel, what would happen is you would speed on every road unless K is extreme, that is the penalty associated with being caught is extreme, like you get executed if you're caught. V is tiny, so you have no value of speeding, virtually no value of speeding, or you have a really slow car like Yoram. Okay. In that case, you don't speed either. Okay. So, all right, tax fraud is similar, and I'm not going to go through that because I want to spend most of my time talking about the education case. But let me just make one point with respect to tax fraud. Again, it's the same idea, but in the context of tax fraud, it's easy to see that there may be actually a conflict between deterrence of the fraud and revenue collection. Because in this case, what you might want to do is you might say, well, look, we can keep people from committing fraud. On the other hand, if they commit fraud and then we go out and catch them, then they pay not only the taxes, but they pay the fine. Okay? And so if revenue collection is part of your goal, you might say, well, gee, maybe we want to do that. And this is what you can think of this as like entrapment in some sense, although it's not really entrapment because people know the rules ex ante and they know that there's going to be some likelihood that they're going to get caught. So that immediately points out that I haven't really solved the social problem yet. All I've done is kind of assume that we want to deter speeding, or assume this, or assume that, and I haven't worked through what we really want to do from a social point of view. So I need to set that up and think about that in a more formal way. Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
There's a paper by Springle on this issue.
On the tax fraud?
Yeah.
On the entrapment sort of idea?
Yeah. How to allocate resources across the probabilistic by income and so forth.
Okay, all right, yeah. I'm not aware of that. Okay, good. So, all right, so now let me shift gears and go right to the issue that I'm most concerned about, which is this question of teaching to the test. Again, the model is going to be virtually the same. I'm changing the notation on you a little bit because I want to take into account different kinds of issues here slightly. So think of N as the total number of items in the knowledge set, and that's like the Z miles that you can travel. Think of M as the number of questions on the exam. For right now, we'll take that as exogenous. Later on, I'll make that endogenous, but for right now, just take that as given. V, now, instead of being the benefit of speeding, is going to be the cost to the student or to the teacher of learning a particular item. What's the problem? No good sound?
Yeah.
I have it off? Oh. I did a bad thing.
Could you start over?
Yeah. No, I understand. Is that bad? Can I just go on, or I might as well miss the first one?
Go to the podium. The issue's recorded.
I think they're recording, so yeah. I mean, we've already missed it.
It's okay.
It's okay? I teach MBA, so I'm used to shouting. Okay, good. All right, so it's okay? Yeah, okay. So
again, V now is the cost of learning a particular item. I want to think of K as the penalty per mistake, and depending on whether I think about the student problem or the teacher problem, if you're thinking about K as the penalty, if it's a student problem, it might be the wage loss that I suffer if I don't get a question right on an exam. That would work maybe by keeping me out of a particular program. I don't get into the university if I miss a question on an exam. Something like that. That's the way to think about it. If it's the teacher, then we can think of it as you actually punish the teachers, potentially punish the teachers if their students do badly. Q, I'll come back to that. That's going to be the proportion of items subject to testing, and X is the expected penalty, and I'll come back to that as well. All right, as before, let's think of the simplest model here, where I don't do any of the social problem. Again, exactly as before. If I don't announce which questions are on the exam, you'll learn everything if the cost of learning, V, is less than the expected penalty that you suffer from missing a question on the exam. All right? If I announce what's on the exam, you won't learn anything that's not announced, but you'll learn the things that are announced if the cost of learning is less than the penalty that you're going to pay with certainty, because it's going to be on the exam and you're going to miss it if you don't study it. And so again, just as before, there'll be more learning when you announce the questions if this condition holds, which says you're not going to learn anything if they don't tell you, but at least you'll learn those things that are on the exam if they do tell you. Okay? So again, exactly the same story. Now, as I said, this is, I haven't modeled the social problem, so I want to do that now, and I want to also introduce two kinds of continuity here. One is I've considered two corner solutions. One is where you announce everything. You announce exactly what's on the exam. And the other is you don't announce anything. But we could think about this parameter Q where you say, okay, I'm not going to tell you exactly what's on the exam, but I'm going to say that these are the items that are subject to test. So Q of the N items are subject to test. And the second thing I want to do is I'm going to want to allow V, this value or this cost in this case of learning an item, I want that to be able to vary across people and also across different pieces of knowledge. Okay, so those are the two innovations here that I'm going to bring into this part of the model. But the basic intuition is going to stay pretty much the same. But let me spend 5 minutes or so just working through that and show you how that works. All right, so now I want you to think of V as the cost of learning as having some density function J of V, which can reflect either differences across people, and this is actually important from the policy point of view. We'll come back to that. Or differences for a given person across items in the knowledge base, so some things might be easier to learn than others. As before, you're going to learn an item if V, the cost of learning that item, is less than X, which is now the expected penalty associated with learning the item. So what's the expected penalty? Well, the expected penalty is the fine that you pay, K, if you miss the question, times the probability that you're going to have that question on the exam, which is M, the number of questions on the exam, times Q over N, which are the number of items subject to test. Okay, because now Q is the proportion of items subject to test. All right. So, oops, this is not good. Define the telephone as a. All right. The telephone is this gamma. Okay, so the telephone is gamma. All right. So think of gamma as being the social damage associated with missing a question. So you can think of that as lower productivity for the worker or externalities that might be produced when people don't get educated, that kind of thing. And so this is the social damage associated with levying any expected fine X, because if the expected fine is X, then for values of V, cost greater than X, those people will opt not to study, and so they impose a cost on society gamma, but since they don't study, they don't bear this private cost of learning V. Okay, so that's the cost associated with that. And then I can just calculate what I call the full social damage, which is over all the N items in the knowledge base, and that's this expression here. So NQ are subject to test, and I have a penalty of X on those. 1 minus Q times N are not subject to test. I tell you with certainty that you're not going to be tested on those. and the penalty then you know is 0, so you're not going to learn those. So this is the social damage associated with that. And what I want to solve now for is the optimal Q. So solving here, what I want to do is I want to find out what's the optimal Q, and that's the problem that I'm solving here. So I'm going to minimize the full social damage by simply taking the first derivative and solving for the optimal Q. And then I want to ask, when do these corner cases turn out to be part of the optimal solution? Okay? So the corner cases is where you announce everything, which is when Q is equal to M over N. If Q is equal to M over N, you're telling them exactly what's on the exam. And if Q is equal to 1, then you're announcing nothing. Okay? And it's kind of interesting just to look at those two extremes. So what are the conditions? Well, you tell exactly what's on the exam when this S of S function, this S of X function, sorry, the social damage function, is globally concave. That doesn't have a lot of intuitive appeal right now, but if you just bear with me for a minute, I'll give you a couple of examples that will try to make this clear to you on what's going on. But just think of that as when this is globally concave, then you're going to want to go to the corner where you will announce exactly what's on the exam. And then conversely, you'll tell nothing when this S of X function is globally convex. Okay? So those are the two extreme conditions, and if you don't have this global convexity or global concavity, you're going to get an interior solution. So let me try to make this a little bit more intuitive here and give you a feel for what's going on. So let's take a couple of examples. So one example is, suppose that you had a density function on V that looked like this. It's this triangle thing. So you see a lot of the mass here is up at this upper end, which means that you have, the way to think about this is you have a lot of high-cost learners. So most of the people here have a tough time learning the problems. That's where most of the mass is. When that happens, this S of X function is going to be globally concave. And when it's globally concave, if I calculate the full social damage, and I look at that, what I see is I get the minimum full social damage at M over N. That is telling everything. So when people have a difficult time learning, I want to tell them exactly what's on the exam. That's what this thing says. And again, it's quite intuitive, but that comes out of this simple optimization problem. When do I tell nothing? When do I go to the other corner? I think I did this backwards. Well, now let's say I have a lot of high ability students. So most of the mass is down here at the low end. So that it's cheap for these people to learn. They're relatively able, they're relatively efficient learners. Well, then this S of X function is going to be globally convex. And you can see that full social damage is minimized by having Q, unfortunately the Q is buried by my name here, Q equal to 1, which means everything is subject to test. The intuition is these guys are very efficient learners, and as a result, because they're so efficient, you can spread incentives very thinly and still get them to do things. When they're inefficient learners, when these guys are high-cost learners, if you spread the incentives thinly, what's going to happen is they're going to do nothing. So you have to concentrate the incentives on a few items. And that's essentially what's going on behind this problem. Okay? All right, so what are the implications? Well, when the costs of learning are high or concentrated, you want to announce the questions. When the costs are low and concentrated, you want to keep the questions secret. And similarly, if the cost of monitoring is low, so it's cheap to figure out who's doing what, then you want to announce the questions. And when the cost of monitoring is high, you want to keep the questions secret. All right, so what's a good test now? You know, people talk about doing good tests. I'm going to tell you a little story. It's going to take a minute, but it's kind of funny. It's a true story. So when I was working on this paper, it was last February, I was writing this paper, and I was on the plane. We were actually on a ski trip going to Salt Lake City. And I'm sitting there, and I'm writing these equations down, working out this social problem here. And there's a guy sitting next to me, kind of looks like me, except has hair. He's an aging hippie type, you know. And I look at this guy, and he sort of looks at my work, and he turns and he says, "What are you working on?" And this, you know, I'm sure everybody's had this experience. This is a disaster, right? You know, the last thing you want to do is start telling. So, you know, the answer to that question is you say, I'm working on the density of cement, because no one's interested in the density of cement. But I made the mistake of saying, well, it's a problem in education. Well, this guy says, oh, really? He says, I'm a student teacher right now. I'm a student teacher in mathematics. The guy's like, 45 years old. So obviously he's going back for a second career. So he starts talking, and turns out, we start talking about it. He's looking, he understands the equations. Turns out this guy was an undergraduate at Harvard in economics, and he studied with Dick Freeman. So he actually knew what I was doing. And so we started talking about this, and he said, I was saying, well, we talked about what a good test was, and I was saying, well, a good test, you give these people the questions or something. He says, well, then that wouldn't be a very good test, would it be? If you tell people the questions, that's not a good test. And for a minute, even though I'd been working on this problem for a couple of months, I kind of said, yeah, that's right. Everybody knows. That's the whole point of the model, is that a good test depends on the audience, on the students that you're testing. And in one case, a good test is exactly a test where you don't randomize, where you tell people specifically what's on the exam. And in the other case, a good test is one where you tend to randomize. Okay? So in general, these things may be neither globally concave nor globally convex, in which case what you're going to want to do is have an interior Q. And an interior Q is a common case. That's where one that we as educators are pretty familiar with, where you don't necessarily tell people exactly what's on the exam, but you limit the material that's subject to test. You say, I'm only going to test out of the lecture notes, or I'm only going to test the material since the midterm. So that would be an interior solution to Q. A couple of additional implications. Let's think about two different kinds of classes, honors classes versus remedial classes. What do you do in honors classes? In honors classes, the requirements tend to be vague. You tell these students, you give them some material, they say learn the material, it'll be a test. In remedial classes, you tell the students specifically what's going to be tested. Why is that? Again, it's exactly this story. When you have very high-cost students, like in the case of the remedial classes, you got to tell them what's on the exam, otherwise they learn nothing. In the case of the honors classes, where you have able students, very able students, what you do is you make your requirements vague, and that'll be sufficient, again, because they respond easily to very limited incentives. They don't need a lot of incentive to make them go. All right. Again, just to kind of make this realistic, think about young kids versus old kids. When your kids were young, you had your kids who were 6, 7, 8 years old, and they would take spelling tests every week. I'm sure you do this in Israel as well. And what they do at the beginning of the week, at least in the United States, they do this everywhere. So they give you a list of words, 5, 10 words, something like that. And then at the end of the week, they say you're going to be tested on those 5 or 10 words, and it's exactly those words. It's not a random sample. When you get older, you're doing your PhD in economics, they don't say we're going to have 10 words at the end of the week and you've got to learn the 10 words. They say here's a reading list, go learn it, and there'll be a test. Okay? And again, that's because the mature students are relatively low V at that point and the younger students are relatively high V. So that's how I would interpret this. Similarly, if you're testing easy material, you're going to give random tests. And if you're going to do very difficult material, you're going to give specific tests. I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but sometimes you have a problem that you've been working on for a long time you can't solve. You say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this problem on the exam. You tell them specifically what's going to be on the exam, and then you say, you solve it, and then I can publish that result. Okay? But it's, so the idea is very difficult material. You specify very precisely what's going to be. And again, that just comes out of the optimality condition. I mentioned that initially my problem was I assumed the M questions, the number of questions, was given exogenously. It's a simple matter to make that endogenous. Now all I do is I just introduce a cost of additional questions. So you have a T of M function with the standard properties, T prime, T double prime, positive. And then just solve for the optimality again, taking the first order conditions. And the only interesting result that you get out of that is that this thing, dq/dm, is positive. That is, when M is cheap, when questions are cheap, you also want to have a larger proportion of the knowledge set subject to test. And the intuition for that is that, again, because testing is cheap, because the monitoring technology is very good, you can spread the incentives thinly and still catch these guys. It'll still work. Okay, that's the basic idea behind it. All right. Well, I've been talking about this in terms of student learning, but most of the issue here is really about teaching, not learning. It's trivial to talk about this in terms of teachers. All I have to do is change the terminology. Instead of thinking of V as the cost for the student to learn an item, just think of the student as being passive, and V is now the cost for the teacher to impart the knowledge on the student. Okay? Then K is the penalty that the teacher faces if his student doesn't learn, and then everything is identical. All the results are simply identical. So it doesn't matter whether you think of this as the student learning or the teacher learning. Yeah. Okay. So most of the people that are worried about this problem, though, at least in the U.S., are concerned that the problem is not so much that, announcing questions or not announcing questions. That's part of the problem. But one of the big problems is that the teachers basically don't pay any penalty at all when their kids miss the questions. That there really is no accountability. That's the word that's used. So K is very close to 0 as a result. You have too low a penalty. And, there are a lot of institutional reasons for that. People complain about unions and so forth. But the point is that if K is close to 0, you have to ask, why do teachers teach anything at all? I mean, why bother? You're not facing any penalty. So the only answer to that is, something like intrinsic motivation. That you get some utility from teaching. That you're embarrassed to not teach. So that's modeled as just saying, well, that means your V is less than 0. That you actually face a negative cost to teaching. And if there are a significant number of teachers with negative cost to teaching, that's like the triangle that I showed you where all the V's are concentrated to the left. You got a lot of low-cost teachers there. And what that says then is that if you have teachers who are highly intrinsically motivated, you don't have to specify exactly what it is that they're going to have to do. Because of their intrinsic motivation, kind of a random stochastic monitoring regime with thinly spread incentives is going to work very well. So the No Child Left Behind thing, which the Bush administration put in about 4 years ago, I guess, and I kind of thought was, I've been thinking about this a lot, again, in connection with this board that I'm on. When I first thought about it, I thought that was pretty nutty. But after writing this, I think it's not as nutty as I thought. Because basically what that does is it says, for kids or teachers in disadvantaged schools, we're going to really use these high-stakes tests and they're going to matter. All kids take the same test, but if you're in a suburban school with middle-class kids, none of those schools are in any jeopardy of failing these tests. So it's just not a binding constraint. So basically what they're saying is we're going to use random kind of stochastic monitoring for these high-level schools, and we're going to use very specific high-stakes testing for the low-level schools. So to a first approximation, they may be doing something like this. It turns out it's not quite as bad as I had thought. We could also think of this, by the way, as monitoring on input rather than monitoring on output. You can use exactly the same model and simply think about the teacher teaching n minutes, and one item is learned per minute, and then the principal comes into the room and views as the teacher teaching. That's an input monitor rather than an output monitor. And you do that m minutes of the time, and you can say q of the minutes are subject to a visit by the principal just as before. And you face a penalty K if not teaching, and again, everything goes through. So I can think of this as a model that's input-based or output-based. It's not going to matter. There's nothing in the model, per se, that tells me whether you should use an input or an output-based structure. That really, there's a big literature in compensation and personnel economics on these issues about whether you monitor on input or whether you monitor on output. And there's nothing particularly specific to this problem, or I certainly don't have any insights on that, on whether you would do one or the other. I'm going to skip this and go to the end here. So let me just mention a couple of ideas for future work, which I'm hoping to do later on. Maybe if you have any ideas or suggestions on this, let me know. So the next thing I want to do is think about the actual structure of testing. You can think about giving one big test or a lot of little tests along the way. And I've done some of this work. It turns out these things are very complicated because there are all these, there are very ugly problems in combinatorials where you got, factorials over factorials, and then when you differentiate the thing, you end up with these phi functions. It's a total mess. But I'm trying to get some mileage on that, and sort of my initial results suggest that smaller tests are better than one big one, but I'm not clear that that's right. I think the more interesting problem, there's another one about, again, this gets closer to compensation, where you think, should you have a pass-fail, you either pass or not, or should you have continuous evaluation? And that's kind of like, do you pay people on a tournament basis, where you either make it or you don't, you promote it or you don't, or do you pay them a piece rate, where it's a continuous structure? So that's a way to think about this. One of the questions that intrigues me, and I want to spend some time on, I think this is a neat problem, but again, I haven't made any headway on it, is what's the optimal difficulty of the exam? And you can think of this from both a statistical point of view and also from an incentive point of view. So the statistical point of view is kind of a signal-to-noise issue. If the exam is too easy, then the problem is, you make a silly mistake, and then, and then you bomb the exam. And so a very good student can make a silly mistake. That's not a good exam. At the other extreme, if the exam is too difficult, everybody gets 0. It doesn't differentiate, so you don't want to be there either. So that's kind of a statistical argument. But there's also, I think, more of an economic argument that relates to the incentives, and that is that if the exam is too difficult, everybody gives up. Basically, it just kills off your incentive. If the exam is too easy, then there's no incentive to learn any of the difficult material. So again, you can think of sort of an optimal difficulty of the exam that takes into account these statistical issues and also these incentive issues, but I'm not there yet. Okay, conclusion. So what this model suggests is that you want to use high-stakes, predictable tests when the monitoring costs are high and when the learning costs are high. And so those two guys that I was talking about, they were actually, it's kind of interesting because one guy it turns out, is the lawyer, the guy who was worried about the kids that basically couldn't even read the test. So this guy was worried about, basically kids from very disadvantaged areas, and that's the idea where you have very high learning costs. The other guy, Koretz, this guy lives in Newton, and he's thinking of all these, smart Jewish kids in the suburbs, who, where he's worried about creativity. Okay, so from his point of view, these very narrowly defined tests eliminate the incentive to learn material that these guys otherwise would have learned had you not told them what was on the test. So I think this kind of reconciles these two viewpoints. Additional results, you want to use high-stakes, predictable tests for young students, for difficult material, and again, when teachers are not intrinsically motivated. And restricted randomization, which is where you have this interior solution on Q, can often improve on either corner solution. So let me stop there and see what Yoram has to say, or Ruben has to say. Sorry.